The standard Bowmasters art is objectively the best art. Hello and welcome to Eternal Turtles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Bleckman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Dude, what's up, dude? Are you ready to talk about the black being the best fair color in the format now?
I love this. I think that, yeah, of course I'm ready. I think it's time. It's well past time, actually, that black got its due again.
Yeah, Bowmasters, I mean, pretty much the Lord of the Rings set as a whole has sort of introduced black back into the world as a color beyond Dark Ritual decks.
Yeah, so, I mean, you've got, Troll of Khazad-dûm, Sauron's Ransom, Orcish Bowmasters, obviously. What else?
Yeah, those three cards in particular are the most noticeable ones.
Yeah.
I mean, Bowmasters is what now the most played creature in the format. I think so, I get that it's still fresh and the format needs to adjust, but yeah, it's that, and then the fact that it has brought along with it a bunch of other decks that then also look for other cards. So Baleful Strix starts to show back up a lot more, and the Esper style stuff. But the land cyclers as a whole were slow. People were slow to recognize those. I think, including us. I don't think we recognized the cyclers immediately.
No, I just read that as another card from what was it? Ikoria. The 1-mana cyclers from Ikoria that we weren't. I completely wasn't interested in unless I was going to play a draft, right? The draft format was just basically whoever gets the most of those and the payoffs or whatever. But this is more. These are being used in ways that are. It feels much different than those cards.
Yeah, I mean, the Troll of Khazad-dûm is just being specifically abused with Reanimate. I haven't seen it anywhere else other than doing exactly that.
Yep.
Where it's just it's an unblockable 6/5 on turn 1, which is just better than that Street Wraith plan that Death Shadow players used to do.
We do have that planned, or did, I should say.
Yeah, and this is just a huge upgrade to that, right? As long because you would need 1 mana source anyway. And even though you can't do it on turn, you can't do that play on turn 1 like you can with Street Wraith, Cycle plus Reanimate. But the difference between a 6/5 and a 3/4, both of which would theoretically be unblockable if their text is relevant, then it's all right, well, it's still a faster clock even on turn 2 than the Street Wraith on turn 1. So it doesn't really change that math at all. And the only difference is your opponent would have access to a mana, but you would theoretically be able to play around days because the troll got you a second mana anyway. So it just lines up across the table in a really meaningful way to have this play pattern be yeah, here's just another way that I can cheat my land count and then still get my threat density high enough. And it's the same thing with Lorien Revealed. Lorien Revealed's been showing all the control forums, huge hotness for Lorien Revealed. And I get it, man. I know we've joked a bunch about how I've joked a bunch. I'm dude, if they just printed blue instant, shuffle your deck, draw a card, playable.
Yeah.
Playable.
Well, you know what is interesting besides the shuffle part, going back to Troll of Khazad-dûm is and even Lorien Revealed is it's colorless a colorless answer to Blood Moon. If you're playing a 1-of basic in your deck, that is now 5 basics that you have. If you're playing, I'm not playing for Troll of Khazad-dûm, but basically allowing you to get the basic you need when you need it using colorless mana is pretty powerful against those decks that are playing, Blood Moon or messing with your mana somehow.
Yeah, it also allows you to artificially inflate your colored count. Both cards allow you to do that, whether it's for Grief or for any of the force effects. Just being able to increase the number of cards that you have that are those colors is actually really relevant. And the quality of at least for Lorien Revealed, I mean, I guess for all of them to an extent, is they sort of help feed each other in multiple copies, because if you use your first 3 all to cycle to get lands, and then you get to cast the 4th one, and the 4th ones are pretty impactful spells, when you get to that stage of the game.
Yeah.
Those are very one is just a very dense threat, and then the other one is a Ancestral Recall. And I get that 5 mana for sorcery speed Ancestral is not it, but it's good in the matches where you would cast it.
Because I know the red one is an elephant, and I think when it attacks, it gives another creature +2/+0.
It's a pump spell, right?
The green one is a 5/7 reach creature.
Yeah, ETBs, it makes food.
Yeah. And what's the
tree
white
folk.
one?
The white one's the 3/3 bird that gives the rest of your team like +1/+0 and first strike. It's bad.
Well, that's
It's like
objectively
a 6,
the worst one, yeah.
It's like a 6-mana 3/3. It's the worst one.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, we say all that to say this. What we want to talk about, actually, on this episode is the rhetoric around Orcish Bowmasters. It seems like a lot of people are on one side or the other of the Bowmasters debate. Personally, for me, I think the correct answer is that the standard art is the better art. But that's all in jest. People are calling for this card to be banned. I think they're the overwhelming vocal minority to the people that have played against this card and with this card that are like, this is good for the format, which is truly I'm on that side of that debate.
I'm still up in the air on it. When you were like, hey, let's talk about Bowmasters and its positive effects on the format, I think it being part of bringing black into the foray of fair decks, as opposed to just black being used as a dark ritual deck in the format, I think that's positive.
Yeah.
As we were chatting about before we hopped on this recording, the more I play against Bowmasters, and the more I talk about Bowmasters with various people who play different archetypes, the more I think about how every part of Bowmasters is excellent. And it's good against the decks that want to draw cards. It's good against X1 creatures, but it also provides multiple bodies, and it goes wide and tall. Like, it does everything at instant speed for the minimal cost. Like, it's not a black cost. It's very splashable. So every single part of the card in pretty much every facet is exceptional.
Yeah.
And the areas where it's most punishing, I keep going back to the argument of the discussion a long time ago, and I think it was P. Sully who had mentioned once, where he was like talking about Submerge, and Submerge is a free spell that tucks green creatures, and he's like, this design is weird because why does it exist? Who are we trying to punish? Why are we trying to punish the Tarmogoyf player? Like, that seems like not degenerate gameplay that we should give a free piece of interaction to that, you know, helps put you really far ahead. It seems like that kind of play pattern isn't the thing that needs to be, brought down. And so with Bowmasters is pushing I don't think Bowmasters is good against Breakfast. Like, yeah, it's fine, but like they don't need to expose their pieces. It's a combo deck, and Bowmasters is effectively a removal spell. But against the decks that wanted to play, your Green Sun Zenith for Dryad Arbor going deep, and then Bowmasters just gets to punish those players because they don't have a combo out. They need to commit their stuff to the table.
Yeah.
Or punishing cantrips specifically. I think we have a long history of, cantrips are the best thing to be doing. And I think the format is so fast now that I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that, like, if you spend time, like, nowadays, let's say you sit down across from the table and your opponent in the blind goes Volcanic Island Ponder. Do you not have a sigh of relief that it's not DRC or that it's not literally any threat, right? Like,
yeah,
you every time your opponent, you're on the draw and your opponent goes turn one Ponder, you're like, oh, thank God, right? I actually will get a turn of development now.
Yeah.
Like, this is
the first thing I think is, they didn't have a threat.
Right, yeah, but it's like, but the cantrip itself isn't the thing that's scary, right? Like, and also it requires time now, and the format is so fast that you're not often given the time to be able to execute those things, and like you have to compress your curve even further in order to leverage those cantrips now. And then there's other cantrips that, if you use your cantrips, we were just talking about Lorien Revealed and the other cyclers to ensure that you get your land drops. I just think that like the part of Bowmasters. Initially, when it first came out, I'm like, yeah, this is doing a bunch of interactive things. It's not like Hull Breacher, which is total shit, where the game just ends. You actually can play through a Bowmasters, which I still think. But I think that the part that the discussion about Bowmasters hasn't shifted to yet is, I don't know if Bowmasters, as being as ubiquitous as it is meaningfully healthy, in that I feel like it's punishing aspects of the format that were already being punished by the fact that the format was speeding up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. I think before we go too much further down that path, I wanted to just say something about Bowmasters and Black being playable. I think that it existing and being like so obviously powerful allowed for black to be seen as a color that can be played again. When in truth, I think black was, especially if you consider the other cards that we talked about, like Sauron's Ransom and Troll of Khazad-dûm, when black actually was playable this entire time, but people weren't willing to ruin their win percentage with an experimentation.
I don't know if that's true, because I don't think if you look at the black cards without Troll, or with it, which is just speeding up a deck that otherwise previously existed, right? Like, you having access to a 6/5 unblockable on turn 2 is like, that's just an extremely fast clock, right? It means that you're now pseudo reanimator on top of
you have 4
Shadow.
turns. Yeah, and your opponent has 4 turns, I should say.
Well, your opponent has 3 turns, assuming that they need 2 fetches to play the game. And I think that without the additions of Lord of the Rings, I think black is still just completely buried by Uro existing. Yeah. Like, you can never play through an Uro, where now the Lord of the Rings cards just make it so that the deck is fast enough. Like, a fair black deck is fast enough to go under an Uro, or to fight through an Uro after it sticks, like, because you can chunk with all of these heavy pieces, or you can play with enough disruption. And the fact that, like, you would need to cantrip your way to an Uro, and then rather than punishing the Uro, we're punishing the stuff around the Uro. Yeah. I think that, like, fair black, I don't think was underexplored in before Lord of the Rings. I think Uro actually just buried it. Yeah,
that's fair.
I like, in a way that was unhealthy. Like, it would be better in that circumstance if Uro didn't exist, to open the pie a little bit. But black getting so many tools, and it also being good incidentally against the removal that those decks are like other fair decks are based on, right? Like, other fair decks that aren't playing black are white based, and Bowmasters is very good against both swords and prismatic ending, because it creates multiple bodies. And now you have to decide if you're going to go after, like, the actual threat to your life total, which is the amass token, or the one that, without mana gating, just punishes literally the rest of every card in your deck. So it puts you into tough decisions. The thing is that all of those decisions are good for the Bowmaster player. So
it's funny, every time we have an episode like this, I start off with a very strong stance for what I think is what I want, and somehow you always seem to be able to pull me closer to the middle again, and this is doing that again.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I would much rather have a Bowmaster in the format than a Narset or a Hull Breacher or any of like this, the static, like, you don't get to play anymore type cards. So I'm like, I am definitely not one of the people calling for a Bowmaster ban. I'm more thinking of, like, as we've seen the cards that they have printed that have seen play in, like, that have made it to viability and legacy. I feel like a lot of them all punish the decks that are already struggling to, like, maintain themselves at all without just adopting all those tools themselves, and then effectively uniforming the format into, like, these are the only cards that are playable. And then you have some people that are, like, testing out various things, like, some people will stay on Baleful Strix and some people won't, or whatever it is. But, like,
so I did a quick look the other day on Goldfish, just to see, like, percentages, what's being played, and how far down you can go deck wise until you go under the, like, 2.5-3% mark on deck saturation. And of course, we're still getting. I think right now Grixis Bowmaster, aka Grixis Delver, is the primary deck. And what's wild is a month and a half ago, 8-cast was 1 or 2, and now 8-cast is all the way down to, like, maybe 7. But we have 10 decks that are all above that, like, 3% mark, and I can't remember a time when we were above 10 decks ever. I mean, that goes all the way back to when we were looking at, like, 2014 style Rug Delver. Like, when there were 3 different distinct types of Delver decks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just think that in that respect, the fact that we are seeing a stratification of the meta, at least in some way, and there is actual format diversity, it's good in that respect, because that's the only in truth that I think that out of the Lord of the Rings cards, minus the One Ring, Bowmasters is the only card making a serious impact on the metagame. Cards like Troll of Khazad-dûm, Lorien Revealed are interesting, but I don't think they're making an impact per se on like the deck choices people are making.
I think it is the combination of that stuff has pushed people into like Shadow. I feel like is way more popular than it's ever been, and it's because the combination between both Khazad-dûm and Bowmasters has like significantly like increased the power level of that deck.
And it's a budget deck. Gotta give it some credit for that. Like people are I can get into Legacy now with my modern cards. You know, like they opened a Bowmaster or two. You know, well, I'm saying you open a Bowmaster or two because you were hunting for the One Ring, and you're like, well, what could I play in Legacy? Oh, I have most of these cards. You know, like it's already a budget deck, so I think it's a good entry point into the format anyhow. And so people who are new to the format are like, oh, cool, I can just play this. I already have a lot of these cards. And Bowmaster just kind of repopularized a deck that was already like pretty okay.
Yeah, I'm looking for.
I think it was ranked as like a tier 3 deck before this. It's probably closer to a tier 2 deck. Eternal Dirtles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the last. Let's look at the last 90 days of data for. Wait, when did Lord of the Rings come out?
Lord of the Rings came out, whatever SCG Con was, right? Was that like the 28th of September or September of
June? I'll look at the last month because that has given some amount of people, some people an amount of time to actually move around with.
I think that's fair.
So looking at this is MTG Goldfish. Now, like for what it's worth, also like this is tabletop. This is not Moto. Moto and tabletop are still different formats. Like there's a bunch of cards that are not legal on Moto. Everybody knows this at this point. That's not a secret. It is functionally different formats in terms of like answers to certain things, tools that certain decks have access to. So grain of salt both ways. But in terms of paper tabletop metagame, this is MTG Goldfish. All of the talk of post. Look at these new things that we get to play with. Grixis Delver is 14% of the metagame, right? Which is just blue-red splashing for Thoughtseize Orcish Bowmasters. And then 9.6% is Death Shadow, which is Days Wasteland, Orcish Bowmasters.
It's the same deck, yeah.
So it's still just under 26% of the format that you're running into Days Wasteland. In terms of like how much like Bowmaster's positivity is for the format, it's really just the same flavor that we've had before, like the expressive ban in a different flavor. Instead of your opponent getting to draw you two cards.
Yeah. But that's the power of
your opponent drawing two cards off
Wasteland
expressive, they just get to make bodies.
Brainstorm decks, right? Like, is that, that's the joke, is like every time somebody creates a card that's good against Delver, Delver just goes, thanks, I'll just put this in my
it just absorbs it. Because it's the most efficient thing to be doing. And but the thing is Orcish Bowmasters leans really hard into that, in that for 2 mana at instant speed, it does so much, right? It just does all of the different things in a variety of different tools. Like the cost of entry for Bowmasters to just be exquisite in this particular kind of shell is it goes wide and tall. It is both disruptive and removal. Like it does everything. It does everything, and it does it on the splash. So, but in ways that everybody's like, Bowmaster is positive for the format. In a way, I feel like it's also like we haven't been lived with it long enough to recognize that it's really just a different flavor of the thing that we all really hated a bunch of last time. Except instead, now they have a threat that's also incidentally a burn spell and a removal spell and makes multiple bodies and goes wide and tall. And instead of your opponent just getting to look at the top 3 cards and choose the 2 best ones, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like it's. I feel like I'm dunking on the opposition to Bowmaster side of things, but again, it's not that Bowmasters isn't healthy for the format. It bringing black into viability as a fair color certainly is good for the format.
Yeah.
I think the downside, though, is that it didn't do it in a way that is different from, recent formats of old where everybody was calling for bans to begin with. It's still propping up the same kind of decks that were doing it with just non-black cards before, as opposed to helping other decks that were struggling, like like this is not propping Jund up. It's not propping like maybe some number of like Abzan depth decks because they have a way to auto kill, but it's not helping just like the actual fair like green white splash decks. You know what I mean? Like they still need an I win button, and that could be just the pace of the format is way too fast. Like the format has sped up, and having another effectively a Tarmogoyf that at instant speed that bludgeons your selection. Yeah, like the format is going to speed up in that regard, and it also works in like the ubiquity of all these different decks. So like the top decks, Grixis Tempo, Orcish Bowmasters, Death Shadow, Bowmasters, Painter, splashing for Bowmasters, Reanimator, playing Bowmasters out of the board, Selesnya Adept, splashing Bowmasters. The first deck that we get to that isn't playing Bowmasters is Mono Red Prison, followed by Death and Taxes, both at just under 5%.
Yeah. You know what's wild on top of that is so next week we want to be talking about the One Ring and its impact. We just had the Modern Pro Tour, a lot of talk about that. But when I was sending you decks, the one thing that I noticed, the first thing I noticed is that 8-cast is now Dimir 8-cast.
Yeah.
They were like, yeah, we're going to play with the One Ring and Orcish Bowmasters. Why not? I haven't even looked at the mana base for that yet.
I mean,
and it is something I spoke about when I was interviewing Brian Koval at SDG. I was like, I would just throw this into my deck if I could find a spot for it. So I don't, I think there's a lot more testing to be done as far as like where the optimal place for this card is. But you might be right. It might be everywhere. Where's the optimal place for Brainstorm? In any deck that wants Brainstorm, right? Like it doesn't. You don't necessarily need to find the optimal build for some cards. You can just find the fact that the card makes the build optimal.
Yeah, speaking of 8-cast, I mean, 8-cast has splashed many a color before. I mean, you played a bunch of Haywire Mites without actually having any green sources in your deck outside of your mana rocks, right? So it's not it wouldn't be crazy to like also play Bowmaster to fight Bowmaster. I have seen 8-cast decks that play Dismember simply because they need to be able to remove a Bowmaster so they can actually start churning through their deck normally. But I just want to point out before we just for numbers' sake, the last 30 days on MTG Goldfish, the top looking at the top 5 decks of Metashare, which are all Bowmaster decks before you get to Mono Red Prison, which is just under 5%, it's 41%. 41% of the field is Orcish Bowmasters in combo, aggro, and control.
Okay, but that's acceptable.
I take it back. No
41%.
Control. There's no control.
It's just
tempo
all speed.
aggro,
Yeah.
Painter combo, Reanimator combo, Selesnya Adepts, which is like mid-range combo.
It's so weird to me that Painter is like this is where I'm going for my splash, because that's not how Painter wins, right? Like not for the most part. Like occasionally you're gonna Chalice Blood Moon somebody and be like, I'm gonna get you with my Goblin Rabble Master, whatever your threat du jour is. But it's wild that like Bowmaster is the card that they went to and they were like, we need to splash black for this card that wins in a way that's not akin to our strategy at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it. I'm not a Painter master, so I don't know. Like, call up Callum, like, see what he says. I think it's also it's partly just because Bowmaster on rate is unbelievable, right? It just does so much against so many things. Like,
I mean, 2 bodies to just block and stay in the game is not nothing, right?
But
like,
it's
ping a guy, block. Yeah.
It's not just 2 bodies. It's 2 distinct bodies that both demand removal.
Yeah.
And it has ETB value as both removal or planeswalker check, or it's also just incidentally a burn spell. You know, like it is all of the
which we saw at the Pro Tour. Yeah.
It's like the second Bowmasters was spoiled, everybody lost their shit, right? Like it was no secret because it literally does all of the things.
Yeah.
Including drawing you potentially multiple cards on ETB, because if it kills a creature, you're plus a card. Assuming that even if that card drew a card that you killed, it's like, okay, well, now you're at parity, and it also makes an additional body. So on its face, if it kills something, it's plus 2 cards because it killed the thing and made you a body, or it taxes a planeswalker, and then a planeswalker isn't necessarily able to remove either side of the body. The thing is that all of the power is condensed on the Orc army and not the Bowmaster, but the ability that's punishing the cantrips is tied to the Bowmaster.
Yeah.
So both bodies are very relevant. It's not like any other sound the alarm where it's like, okay, we're going to make 2 1/1s and they are equally they are equal bodies. You know,
I think that a good a good like not like would be like Siege Gang Commander. Like you kill the commander every time, no matter what.
Yeah, because
like,
the
three guys or whatever.
There's 3/1s. Yeah.
Yeah.
As opposed to like leaving behind a 4/4 or whatever.
Yeah.
But the thing about Bowmasters, it reminds me actually similarly of Uro, which was pushing out all the black decks, in that like when Uro was first spoiled, you look at it and you're like, oh, this card does actually everything. It gains life, and it draws cards, and it excels you, and it's recurable, and it like you can never actually kill it with anything other than a swords. But then you can all like the entire Buffalo is fucking great, right? There's no part of this that's bad.
It's true.
And it's like in a world with fetch lands, the deniability, the denying somebody off of their colors is really like the only like cost that it has, but not really, because we have perfect mana in this format. So it's like, yes, there are times where like you can cut somebody off double green, but like it is not nearly the way to check that card that they thought in design, because they didn't design it with fetch lands, right?
Yeah.
And then with Bowmasters, I mean, they designed Bowmasters for Modern, and Bowmasters just does like that's also another particular interesting thing about Bowmasters entering Modern. They built Lord of the Rings for Modern, and Modern already had Ren and Six and Fury and all of these other things that are already punishing X1s. Like, it is a really tough world to be an X1 if you're in it. But like, it's sort of doing something similar in Legacy, where I think the reason that, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong here, but the reason that people moved over to Death Shadow away from Grixis, even though Grixis has still got the majority share of the metagame, a lot of people moved over to the Death Shadow because it's less punished by a Bowmaster hitting your DRC that's not Delirious or whatever.
Yeah. And, well, it's funny because, you know, there's those two different flavors of Death Shadow right now. You've got the more mid-range Urion builds that are playing Baleful Strix, which obviously gets hit by Bowmasters. And for what it's worth, it is still drawing a card, so it's not like the absolute worst against Bowmasters. But it's not great. You don't want that to happen. Right, but if you're also playing Bowmasters, you're like, screw it. Like, I'll just jam all the good cards together in the Urion deck. But I think in the more tempo-based, like almost Delver style decks, and I was playing 2 Delver in mine, having Bowmasters as like an out, of course you're gonna have the Bowmasters is the only thing your opponent can target, like, you know, in any way that makes it worth it. In Death Shadow, because otherwise you're playing Street Wraith occasionally. Now we've got the Troll. Everything is an X, like 2 or above. You know, everything is big. Grief. You know, all those things aren't getting killed by the Bowmaster unless you play Brainstorm stupidly. And that's a whole like metric that like all the heuristics of Brainstorm have been thrown out the window in the last like couple of weeks.
I've been curious to think about like when they were designing Bowmasters, and you know, I think, you know, Bowmasters churning the format like it's doing is interesting, right? Like, I think it's cool. But I've been curious. The more and more I play against it, the more I wonder when they were testing it if they had the ETB before, or if they like tacked that on afterwards. Like if they just wanted to punish people drawing cards outside of their draw step, so you flash it in and then you would amass Orcs 1 and ping after they've drawn their card.
Yeah.
And then they decided, actually, let's also add it as an ETB, because I feel like the ETB is what pushes it over the top, as like everything is into like now it's no. It's interesting to. I feel like I'm rambling now, but like
no, you're 100% correct. Now you can flash it in for some amount of value when there's mana open. You know, like it just adds another layer to that card. You know,
because like at the end of the day, if nothing happens, it flashes in and it represents 3 damage.
Yeah.
Right. So you pass with 2 mana and it's 3 damage plus still and a bunch of board presence, which feels really like above the curve. I don't have anything that I can think of to compare it to other than, you know, unplayable cards. But I'm also thinking, like, has Bowmaster sort of taken over the format as like the most ubiquitous card across all these different kinds of archetypes, between tempo aggro, combo, control, mid-range combo, actual just straight combo, because there aren't any other reasonable things to play at 2?
Probably. I think you know, I think it's funny that, you know, this card's obviously good specifically because it costs 2 mana and it has flash. But I think that we entered a long time ago a world where like no one was playing Spell Snare because like you were either playing your 2-drop was either Murktide Regent that doesn't actually have two converted mana cost, or you were skipping ahead and playing a 3-drop. You
did bring up if you would like to, you brought up another thing that I wanted to talk about that Bowmasters has sort of highlighted for me as like I played against it and I tested a bunch of cards in the format. Particularly, I thought because you brought up Spell Snare, that 1 mana conditional removal spells like Spell Snare, Stern Scolding, stuff like that. Yeah. What I have tested all those things as ways to combat those types of cards, like Bowmasters.
Yeah.
And there's 2 significant issues with those kinds of cards, and why I don't think any of them are playable, even though it seems like it would be good at face value because they both trade up and all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. The issues with those cards are twofold. One, they're narrow.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed.
But they're narrow but they're narrow plus
Sustained.
Being reactive. So the person who's playing Bowmaster, like we were just saying, they can just fire it off at the end of their turn 2 to progress their board at no cost. Like it gives them all of the edge, all of the advantage, just by casting their spell. Like they are under no condition to have to wait if they don't want to. They can just put a clock on you, and it's a significant clock with multiple bodies that's taxing you in different ways, and putting you in and putting on the squeeze. Whereas Snare, you have to have it in your hand before they actually fire that off. Same thing with Stern Scolding. But the other side of it is that if your opponent even has a sense about it, they just don't have to move, right? Like you are confined by your opponent's actions with those kinds of cards, which makes it just impossible for you to like actually effectively leverage it unless your opponent is willing to let you.
Yeah. Especially, we're going to go, I'll take this all the way back to deck building. If you're going to land go your opponent and you're playing a deck that plays Brainstorm, you've probably cut like some, from the standard 25 land in a 60 card deck or whatever, you've cut down lands for your cantrips, in deck building. Like this is, even before you even thought about building this deck, just the way that deck building in Magic the Gathering has worked since the advent of Brainstorm and Fetch lands is that we lower the amount of lands so that we can, we're basically replacing those land drops with spells that find us those lands. So when you're in a situation where you're going, well, I'll just pass turn, but you're not dropping land, you're not creating more board presence, or you're not putting an advantage out for yourself, yeah, that's when things go really wrong. So yeah, I think Spell Snare and Stern Scolding aren't going to do it per se. They're going to be cute and catch people occasionally, but specifically Spell Snare, it still doesn't feel good. Even if you hit the occasional Orcish Bowmaster, like I just feel like there's better ways of dealing with an Orcish Bowmaster than putting a card that only counters Orcish Bowmaster. It seems like right now.
To be realistic, there's actually no good way to deal with a Bowmaster outside of catching it on the stack.
Yeah.
Because it will leave a body behind that will either compel you to trade another card or put another resource in into fighting over the second resource that it made. And it will at least trade with either a card that you already have on the table, or it will deal some amount of damage, and if you're playing against an aggro deck, that's not nothing, right? So it's not like their card did nothing if it sticks. So you have to catch it on a stack.
Plague Engineer naming Orc.
So Wraths are fine, right? Wraths are ways to clean up a board.
Does it. Yep.
But I think that the issue with anything that is a conditional counterspell, the power level of the format is such that those kinds of counterspells are no longer viable at the same level. They would need to do something else. Like Spell Snare just countering the spell is no longer good enough.
It needs to cycle too or something, Yeah.
It sucks because Veil of Summer is absolute horseshit, right?
Yeah.
But Veil of Summer is at the power level that is necessary in order to combat those kinds of threats. The power level of everything else is such that your answers to things either have to be proactive so you can control the terms in which they trade, or they have to have some kind of additional advantage attached to it in some meaningful way that is valuable to you. You can't just have this conditional counterspell that may or may not convert at the time that you need it to convert, because the format is so much faster that it's the games don't go to the point where you're like, oh, I now have this Spell Snare, I can just sit back and wait for them to cast something into it. If they get something in at instant speed, like if if I open, and this is also like a play draw thing, but like let's say they go on their turn to pass, right? And I now need to like cantrip or something to find my second mana source, or I want to be able to like cycle my Lorien's Revealed or whatever to play a second mana source. Like, okay, cycle my Lorien's Revealed. Okay, flash in Bowmasters. Okay, get my land and hold up Spell Snare, and now that Spell Snare is blank, right? Like that's like a subtle example of like your opponent has to agree to those cards being good, which is why they're not. Because if you're playing against somebody that is even remotely aware that you might be playing those cards, it's not difficult to play around them. Like, they're very easy to play around because you can't do anything else with them otherwise. And by choosing not to do anything, you're just porting yourself. Yeah, and by not developing your board, every other deck is so efficient and so powerful because every single threat is game ending that you can't afford to not progress your board or develop in some meaningful way or advance in some progression. So the opportunity cost of those cards, as power level has increased, the opportunity cost of those cards has also significantly increased because by you Rashading porting yourself, hoping that you might catch something, your power level is decreased. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I
do.
It's just like way steeper than like the power creep is not just power creep like all the cards have gotten better. It's also power creep in that the answers to those cards need to get better along with it. Otherwise, they're unplayable. So gone are the days. So like Stern Scolding when it was first revealed, I've been wanting a creature spell pierce for years. Give me a 1-mana way to counter a creature. And it's just like, I don't think it's remotely close. Like, even the stuff that you'd want it against are cheaper than it. Like, I have a Stern Scolding. When I was testing Stern Scolding for a couple of weeks, I can't tell you how embarrassing it feels to be like, okay, my opponent's on the play, I have a Stern Scolding, and they just grief me.
Oh. Yeah,
right?
You can't, yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's not, not good.
Like, if the power level of the threats is that, then the answers have to also be that, which means that Stern Scolding needs to cost 0. And that's degenerate, right? You can't have that. So...
Yeah, because then we get to the same part, the same argument we have, that Orcish Bowmasters is taking up all the airspace from, which is then your best answer for the thing is the thing, and it's killing all of the X1s, or, like for Stern Scolding, what is it, like 2 or less?
Yeah. Yeah. That's also like, it's not like, yes, Bowmasters dealing 1 to the Bowmasters is relevant, but it's important that like you have your own Bowmasters because it's the only thing that's going to make you the additional body to maintain parity on the board.
Exactly, yeah.
Like you need it because it also does the other thing in addition to being the removal spell that we were just talking about. You know what I mean? It's like if removal is going to keep up, it either needs to be like something like Swords, which deals with everything, and even then it will still trade down in instances where it's like, okay, hit the Bowmasters and you still have something left over, or trade with a creature that has already recouped some amount of advantage. But like it being versatile, being able to hit anything is why it's still like the playable card in the format. But like Prismatic Ending, I feel like it's falling off. Like every time I have more than 2 Prismatic Ending in my deck, I'm like, I am glutted. I have no targets. Like this isn't good enough.
Yeah. It's funny that when I started this episode, I was very black and white on this, and I'm approaching a more gray ground. But I still do very much feel like it's healthy for the format right now, and that may change. And that's less like data driven and more just gut. I just feel like right now Legacy is more fun and balanced than it's been in a very long time. Mm-hmm. And that to me means that it's fine and healthy for the format. But I don't know. I guess how our viewers feel. Comment below. How do you feel about Bowmasters? I honestly think that it's 100% fine for the format, but I guess I can see why people would be upset about it if they're not playing it. If they're not playing it, they don't have answers to it. I can see why they'd be upset about it, especially if you're, honestly, Phil, if anybody should be upset about Bowmasters, it's the guy playing Miracles, right? Like, because you don't have, Swords of Plowshares doesn't do enough against it. Sure, Terminus does something, but like they're gonna have other threats, right? It's an army in a can.
It's an army in a can. I think I agree. I think that like Bowmasters, applying some amount of churn to the format, even if it is cosmetic, it's like the majority of the format is still tempo, so it's still like very efficient Days Wasteland shells at the top of the field, and then a bunch of combo that's also just being able to abuse Bowmasters. Yeah. Even if it's cosmetic, like that's still, nice to have in some amount before like hopefully we get some things
I mean,
to
we're
like shake it
talking
up even
about it,
further.
right?
Yeah, it's nice to have some amount of shake up to the format in the first place. Particularly after a time where something can feel stale. But I feel like the ubiquitousness of Bowmasters means that like we're all going to be clamoring for another set to hopefully introduce something that can then shake it up again. You know what I mean? Because Bowmasters is actually everywhere. I think
Servidar's Crusade, but for orcs.
I'm like totally like I'm like very happy to see something that like shake up the format in a meaningful way, but is not like obviously busted enough that it needs to get a ban, because it's not doing anything super prisony or devastating the way that like Ren and 6 did, where it was like an actually insanely difficult permanent to deal with that recouped +1 card every single time and also locked out entire strategies and also was a prison piece and comboed with shit like Wasteland. Like the only downside is that like again they printed a card that's asymmetrical that is good in like every circumstance. Yeah. And to that end, it's like I just hope that like as they continue to like push the power level of cards, that they do it in ways where it's not helping decks push out decks that already are struggling. It's like give the tools for the decks that need help, the actual help that they need, as opposed to like what is the card that they can design that Delver can't absorb? You know what I mean? What like
it's going to have to cost 4 mana. That's the answer. I mean, and are they trying to play the One Ring? I bet they are. I bet people thought about it. Like
yeah, it's. I feel like all of the cards that have been like it's interesting because it made me think of Death and Taxes gets pretty bodied by a Bowmasters, right? Like Bowmasters hits half of their deck because their deck has to be in range of 1 and 2 toughness for their Recruiter of the Guard. And so they just get bodied in a lot of circumstances where a Bowmaster can just check them. And even though the card draw isn't going to hurt them, like the fact that it goes wide makes multiple bodies so they can block, plus it also like shoots Thalia without the Thalia attacks, et cetera, et cetera. But it reminds me of when Ragavan was in the format, and Ragavan made it so that D&T was the best deck because they didn't have to care about a 2-1. And so now I'm thinking, if that pushed that, it's similarly like we've mentioned this before. When Ren and 6 was in the format, the best deck was Storm because it didn't have to care about Ren and 6. When Ragavan was in the format, D&T was the best deck because it didn't have to care about Ragavan. It's like if the decks don't have to care about the best card, then all the decks that are playing the best card are going to be softer because a lot of spots in their deck are being taken up by this card that they're playing that doesn't really hinder the deck that doesn't have to care about it.
Well, that's a great point. That people should just be playing more Doomsday, which we have a video from last week on.
I mean, I don't know, man. If it's Grixis Tempo, which is still Bolt plus damage, and then Death Shadow, which is like Dazed Wasteland plus Thoughtseize plus Clock plus it's like maybe it's not. Maybe it's not actually Doomsday's time. Yeah. Doomsday's at 3.2% of the metagame, so it's not totally gone. Yeah. It's still got a totally reasonable share. I think that like the issue with so like in ways where like Ragavan and Ren and 6 are extremely unhealthy, right? Some decks are propped up from the fact that is the case, where it doesn't seem like there is such a deck for Bowmasters because Bowmasters is good against everything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like if you wanted to do something that's better than if you wanted to do the not best thing, there were ways to do it before with those kinds of cards, right? With Ren and 6, play combo. With Ragavan, play creature base that can put a blocker in the way. With Bowmasters is good against everything. You want to play your creature deck, you're gonna kill him. You want to play your combo deck, it's gonna punish all your draw effects. You want to play your planeswalkers or whatever, it's gonna make multiple bodies and ping them down. It does it all. So I think that format's gonna need another churn, unless the community as a whole hasn't figured out a way to adapt to its ubiquitousnness, because it is showing up everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Well, I think that's kind of a good spot for us to end. I think that I come away with more testing is needed on this topic, but I'm still in the I'm still in the scale of like I think it's healthy for the format. Even if ultimately this card does get banned in a few months, I think it's healthy for the format just to have it shake it up a little bit.
I don't think it's going to be banned. I think like it not being a prison piece is fine. Yeah. I think that like
I agree.
The only downside is that again it's an asymmetrical effect, and it's not an asymmetrical effect that ends the game, but it is an asymmetrical effect that like punishes on multiple axes between damage removal and making a large body. So it does a lot asymmetrically, and even though it doesn't feel like that is as devastating as any of the stuff that like actually hard locks a game out, it still does enough that it makes it so it would be a tough best creature to now oust, because it's cheap, it's very splashable, it can go in every single kind of deck because it's good against every kind of deck. So, all that is to say, I'm excited for Eldraine.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what Eldraine's got. The art style for the set looks great, and again, I know I've said this before. This is my exact style of fantasy. Is like the Arthurian legend, like grim fairy tales kind of thing. That to me is like that is the best. That's the best place to be as far as flavor is concerned for Magic.
And you know what is pretty prominent in fairy tales?
Orcs. Bows? Masters?
Miracles.
Miracles, it's
Miracles.
True. You think we're getting miracles. Okay. You heard it here first, folks. Well, I guess that does it for us this week. Please remember, like, subscribe, share, all that stuff. We're closing in on 1,000. We just hit 900 subscribers. So the closer we get to our sub goal of 1,000, that helps when you're commenting and stuff like that. That makes Facebook push, or Facebook. That helps YouTube push the video further to people. Anything like that you can do, we really appreciate it, and it really helps the channel grow. So thank you so much. Phil, I will catch you next week. Check out this video we got on Legacy Doomsday, and check out some of our other videos. Thanks so much. Bye.